Historians like to date eras based on technological advancements, right? You have the Iron Age, the Bronze Age. Later you have industrial revolutions. But in the past few decades, we have seen change at an unprecedented rate. In the 90s, we have the internet becoming publicly available. In the early 2000s, we get the smartphone. And on November 20th, 2022, we experienced a technological change that I believe is going to fundamentally alter the way that we live, work, and even study church history. Today we're going to be talking about AI. Now this is going to be a multi-part series, at least 2 parts. And in the next part we're going to cover the ethics of AI and how we as Christians might think about this. But today we're going to talk about its uses for church history and your study of church history, which so many of you are interested if you watch this channel. And I think you might be amazed. Stay tuned. Well, today we're in a bit of a different location. My wife has kicked me out of my office, but that is perhaps appropriate because today we are talking about a very different subject, so perhaps it's only fitting that we're in a different location. Today, as I mentioned, we're talking about generative AI. Specifically, some of you may have heard of ChatGPT or Google's Bard or other large language models. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in these. The underlying technology is far beyond my area of expertise. However, I do work in the tech world in my day-to-day job, and I think it's fair to say that AI is at the top of everyone's mind. I cannot go through LinkedIn or any newsfeed or even any conversation without hearing AI. It is everywhere. But generally we're talking about it in terms of how it's going to disrupt industries, or maybe how it's going to change jobs, or perhaps even just what should we do about this? Should we stop it? As I record, there's currently large petitions going around to pause AI large language model development for at least 6 months while we catch up with what all of this means. But today we're going to talk about a use case for church history. Now, I've been playing around with ChatGPT for a little bit now. In my role as a writer, I found it very useful. But when I started applying it to church history, I was kind of amazed. You see, one of the limitations of large language models like ChatGPT is that they're trained on open source old information, right? For the most part, they don't go past the year 2021, which is a limitation for their knowledge of current events. But for church history, this is actually a goldmine. Right? If we think about the amount of writings in church history that are available for free online that ChatGPT has combed through and has extensive knowledge of, it's kind of a perfect use case. Today we're going to look at 3 specific ways that you can use ChatGPT in your study of church history. Now I want to preface this with, this does not replace reading books. This does not replace good old-fashioned study, but it can augment it and help you do it a whole lot faster. Also, if you're not aware, I got a cat, and it's currently trying to burrow underneath my microphone, which is a little annoying. So the first use case for ChatGPT is pretty simple. You can just ask basic queries about church history, but you're going to get the answers a lot faster than you would on the internet. For instance, let's just ask ChatGPT, what happened at the Third Ecumenical Council? Do you know? Well, let's find out. So the Third Ecumenical Council, also known as the Council of Ephesus, was held in 431 AD in Asia Minor. It goes on, it's still going. This thing is so fast, holy cow. So it was attended by more than 200 bishops. It affirmed the title Theotokos. Okay, interesting. One that emphasizing the belief that Jesus was not 2 separate persons, but one person with 2 natures. Okay, so maybe we want to go a little deeper. We could ask, like, well, what was the context for this council? Okay, so it's let us know that the controversy for the Third Ecumenical Council was centered around the teachings of Nestorius, who was the Archbishop of Constantinople, who held that there were 2 distinct persons in Christ, one divine and one human, and that Mary should be referred to as the Christotokos, bearer of Christ, rather than Theotokos, bearer of God. So it goes on there, it gives a couple paragraphs here, but here's a real key, and this will go into what we're going to talk about next. So you can get kind of basic information like that, right? Not that different than the internet, though, although this was a whole lot faster. Here's what I really like, though, and here's how I think you should probably be interacting with something like this if you choose to. So we could say, okay, that's all well and good, but I want to know how it knows this and how I can learn more. So can you cite your sources and ask it for links? And boom, you find right away, we've got New Advent, one from Orthodox Church of America on the Council of Ephesus, and then Christianity Today article, that these are giving us notes on what this is all about. So here's another kind of fun way to dive in even deeper. What are some scholarly debates on this? And already it's given us 4 scholarly debates. So we have, what are the role of politics in the council? Really interesting. The nature of Christ's hypostatic union, also interesting. The influence of the council on later theology and the role of Mary in Christology. Again, we want to be using this to spark our interest so that we can dive deeper and maybe focus in on the topics that interest us the most. So perhaps that idea of the role of politics sounds interesting. Point number 1 in scholarly debate. I could say, can you give me some recommended reading on point number 1? And here we go. We've got a scholarly article by R.P. Vagione, J.W. Drudgevers, N.G. Garsoyan, and one by C.T.R. Hayward. There are given links, citations, page numbers. All of a sudden you have a bibliography to go and learn about this. It's kind of incredible to think about, right? This came out right after I finished my theology degree, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on how we want to think about this. But I would have taken probably hours researching in these clunky online databases to find articles that pertain to this. But here you have them right away. So here we've gone from, okay, what do I want? Just kind of some general information about the Third Ecumenical Council, like where was it, when was it, what was it about? And then we were able to kind of double click on that and say, can you give me some sources so I can read more about the council myself? Great. But then we wanted to know, well, what are some of the scholarly debates around this council? Like what are some of the contested issues? We found one that interested us, and now we have sources and links to go check this out. Kind of incredible. Rituals matter, both big and small. For so many of us, we rush through our days and especially our mornings. Rather than delighting in the little things, we groggily move absent-mindedly through the motions. It's no secret, though, that how we start our mornings shapes our days, and I love starting the day with the ritual of making fantastic coffee manually. Recently, I've partnered with Fox & Sons, a family-owned coffee business committed to doing business the right way. They work with organic farmers around the world and pass on the lessons of business from father to son. Today, I'm making their signature Den Blend Dark Roast, and as it is absolutely criminal to put good coffee in a coffee pot, I'm making it today with an AeroPress, as you see here. And honestly, with just a little extra work, you can make incredible coffee at home. Moreover, you can start the day slowly and intentionally, resisting the manic pace of our culture and appreciating not just great coffee, but the ritual of making it. If you want to support a family-owned Christian coffee business, be sure to check out Fox & Sons Coffee. When you do, use the code GOSPELSIMPLICITY at checkout for 15% off orders over $25. So the second use case is kind of similar to the first, but it's a bit more pointed. I asked ChatGPT earlier a question that many of you ask me all the time, and it's, well, what books should I be reading? And I figured, well, ChatGPT, you seem pretty smart. Let's ask it. So here's the question I asked. I said, I want to learn about the development of church history prior to the Great Schism. Specifically, I'm trying to determine whether the Roman Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church has a better claim to being the one true church. Could you provide me a reading list of 10 books? Prioritize giving a diverse range of views. And then it said, certainly, here you go. And I get a list of 10 books from Orthodox, Protestant, Catholic. I've even got an Assyrian Orthodox book in there, which I hadn't heard of, which was actually really interesting to me. And I think it probably pulled that from the idea of give me a diverse list. Now, it did give me one that was after the Great Schism. It was a book on the Protestant Reformation by Hans J. Hillerbrand. And I said, okay, actually, ChatGPT, like that's after the Great Schism. Can you give me another one? It's like, oh, my bad. Here you go. Now, here's a fun thing you can do after that, though. That's 10 books. Now, you want to go read them, and I absolutely want to emphasize that it's so important to not let ChatGPT do all the thinking for you. Use it as a springboard. Use it as kind of the walking, the moving walkway at the airport, right? Just take it a little faster. Kind of take the shortcut, but still do the work. However, this is really helpful if you're short on time. One book that stood out to me here was titled The Byzantine Empire by Charles Osman, and real quickly, ChatGPT tells me it's the history of the Byzantine Empire and its influence on the development of Christianity. Now I'm intrigued, right? This is an area of theology and history specifically that I'm just not as strong in. My academic route was a lot more Western. My interests were primarily in the medieval West, and so I studied more Latin than Greek, though I took both. But I just wanted to say, okay, I haven't read this book. Can you give me like a summary of what it's about? And it spits out 10, actually 9 points and gives me kind of an overall statement about the book. It gives me its thesis. Now I can decide, oh, actually, maybe I don't want to buy this book. Maybe it's not worth my time. And that's something that's not easy to do, right? I mean, sometimes you can look at reviews of books, you read the back of it, but sometimes how Amazon describes the book or how the back cover describes it really isn't that great. And let's be honest, a lot of the books that you probably like to read and the books that I like to read are a bit obscure, and maybe there's not that many reviews, and so you end up kind of shelling out like 30, 40 bucks on these expensive academic books, and then you just find out that it's not actually giving you the information you want. ChatGPT, on the other hand, can tell me what it's all about, and now I have a summary and I can decide if I want to read it myself. I think you could find that really helpful. By all means, don't stop asking me for book recommendations, but I think this is a really interesting one. Let me show you another use case which was similar to the first. I asked about the context of the Reformation, which is one of the ways that ChatGPT, when I asked it, like, how would you use yourself for understanding church history? It said to understand the context of events. So I asked it about some of the context of the Reformation. I asked, were there any movements that foreshadowed it? It gave a couple: humanism, Renaissance Platonism, the Devotio Moderna, and the Hussite movement. Now, the Hussite movement intrigued me, so I kind of double-clicked on that, if you will, right? And so I said, expand on the Hussite Reformation, and it gives me more information, and my interest is flagged here. So I'm saying, okay, this is interesting. What are the scholarly debates? I love asking ChatGPT this question because we want to broaden that perspective, right? You don't want ChatGPT to be kind of the monolithic, omniscient answerer for you. You want it to give you the pros and cons, or give it multiple perspectives. So it tells me that, while some see it as a foreshadow, others see it more disconnected. It gives a couple other things. And I said, all right, give me a list of primary and secondary texts on this. I get the letters of John Huss, et cetera, and then I get some books on it. And then this is really fun. Are any of these available for free online? And tons of them are, and it just links you to it. All of a sudden, not only you have the books, but you have the free links to them. This is incredible. So I think this is really fun. You can get the context around it, get those scholarly debates. Really interesting. Speaking of getting multiple viewpoints, something I asked it as well were, what do you see as the kind of strengths and weaknesses for the argument of the papacy being part of the deposit of faith? Now, again, this is like a thing that I'm familiar with enough, but if you're exploring something new, that's a great way of getting kind of the broad perspectives. And then if you want to say, okay, expand on something there, give me links to the books, and hey, are any of these free? And you can be finding them for yourself. This is just going to save you so much time. And I really encourage you to prompt it in that way. Give me the pros and cons. Give me the scholarly debates. How would people argue against this? Then you can go and learn more yourself. Okay, the third way that you can engage with ChatGPT is admittedly a kind of fun one, though it does involve more kind of back and forth with an AI. And so take that with a grain of salt. Decide if you want to engage with AI systems in this way. Again, we're going to talk about the ethics of AI in an upcoming episode. But the third way is engaging with ChatGPT as a kind of conversation partner and help it hone your thinking. Here's an example. We're going to go in right here, and say, the papacy claims to be infallible per Vatican I. However, Pope Honorius was condemned as a heretic. Therefore, the papacy and its claims to infallibility are false. This is a conversation that I just had with Eric Ibarra. Be on the lookout for that. So, I'm going to type that in and say, how would you argue against this? So ChatGPT is telling me that I misunderstand Catholic doctrine. It says the argument that the condemnation of Pope Honorius proves that the papacy and its claims to infallibility are false is based on a misunderstanding of the Catholic Church's teaching on infallibility. Interesting. So firstly, it tells me that infallibility of a pope is limited and is a limited and specific doctrine within the Church. It does not mean that the pope is infallible in all matters or that everything he says or does is automatically correct. Instead, it means that the pope is preserved from error when he speaks on matters of faith and morals in his capacity as the head of the Church. In the case of Pope Honorius, it's important to understand the historical context. Goes on, it's kind of made post-mortem, monothelitism, and then it says, while Honorius does not teach this heresy himself, he did not take sufficient action to condemn it and stop its spread. That's interesting. It's kind of taking a stance there, which it doesn't always do. So it says that it's not a condemnation of papal infallibility, but a condemnation of his failure to exercise his teaching authority in a way that upheld the truth of the faith. Now, I'm not sure I agree with this, and it's important to recognize that ChatGPT has limitations, right? And it gets some things wrong. That's one way of looking at this, though. But we could go further on this. So I could say, how could I strengthen my argument? And just like that, ChatGPT is helping me hone my argument. It says that we could look at things like the historical context. It says that the church was struggling with this issue and that the Pope should have come down on it, and he didn't. Should have been clear and unambiguous. Therefore, it's looking like the Pope maybe isn't infallible. I'm not sure how strong of an argument that is, but it's giving me interesting food for thought there. We could talk about theological debate. So it says that it highlights that there's ongoing debates within the church and that not all teachings are settled or infallible, and the fact that a pope was condemned as a heretic by a subsequent council demonstrates that the church is not infallible in all matters and there is room for debate and disagreement on certain theological issues. I'm not sure it's really getting it, but there's something to think about at least. Interpretation of infallibility, I don't really agree with what it comes up with here. This actually seems more like an argument for the papacy, but we're using our own brains, right, to interpret what it has to say. Now, it does give me interesting points that it says that there are other instances in history where popes have made mistakes or have been involved in scandals. For example, the Avignon papacy in the 14th century was marked by corruption and political intrigue, and several popes during this period were criticized for their immoral behavior. So, let's think about this. We could say, okay, can you point me towards scholarly resources for arguments against the papacy based on history? Also, provide the opposite. Arguments for the papacy based on history. Cite and provide links. And just like that, it has given me 3 links for books that argue against the papacy based on history and 3 that argue for it based on history. I hope that you can see that this is an interesting way of kind of sparring with ChatGPT. Perhaps you want to get into debates. Not something I necessarily encourage, but it's not the worst thing ever either. Or perhaps you just want to hone your arguments, something I definitely do encourage. You want to be thinking, okay, what is true and how would I know? You begin coming up with these statements of, okay, this happened and therefore this must be true, or X, Y, Z, or X and Y, therefore Z, right? You're coming up with these premises and conclusion, and ask this logic chopping robot to tear down your argument. And then ask it to help you build it back up and to give you resources to think better about it. I think that's a really fun way of engaging with this, it's not always going to be the best, but chances are not all of you, or not many of you, have access to super smart church historians that you can kind of begin to hone your thinking on, right? ChatGPT is available, and it's really good at pointing out the flaws in your arguments. I think that's a fun way to engage with it. So there are 3 ways. You can do kind of basic inquiries about church history and find out the context about events. You can ask for reading lists and books, especially asking for free links of primary and secondary sources for topics that interest you. And then you can engage with ChatGPT as a kind of sparring partner, an intellectual friend. Let's not use friend, that's kind of creepy, but kind of this intellectual thinking partner, right? That you can kind of hone your arguments and see where the flaws are, strengthen them, find more resources, and keep going back, refining your thinking. Now, that's just scratching the tip of the iceberg. Earlier, I was engaging with ChatGPT about translating untranslated text. That's something that I find fascinating. There's a lot of writings by the church fathers that are only available in Latin and Greek, and my guess is that most of you don't read Latin and Greek. Or even if you do and you're like me, your Latin and Greek, they're a little rusty, and it's just more convenient to read in English. Well, I was having ChatGPT translate untranslated Greek texts, and it did a pretty darn good job. The opportunities there are kind of incredible. I think we're going to see a wave of these texts getting translated by AI, at least with kind of a first glance, and then having humans go back and refine it. And my hope is that we can get a lot of these texts translated really fast and bring them into our hands in English. And then as ChatGPT is doing that, it can also summarize them, give us the main arguments, give us links to them. And I think it's just going to be a really fun time to study church history. Now, like I said, there's all types of ethical quandaries here, and the question of whether we're all going to be replaced by robots is a live question that we should be thinking about, and we will in a future episode. But for now, I say this is an exciting time. That if you want quick access to your questions about church history, it has never been easier. Now, ChatGPT is prone to get things wrong. It's prone to hallucinate, especially with more recent events. I had a really fun time with it, asking if it knew who I am, and it told me that Gospel Simplicity, it told me that Austin Suggs is the creator of Gospel Simplicity, a YouTube channel focused on church history, primarily in the context of the Church of Latter-day Saints. And I told it, yeah, that's not right. And it's like, oh, thanks for letting me know. And so then I prompted it again in a new chat and asked if it knew what I was about. And it said that Austin Suggs is the creator of Gospel Simplicity, a channel that brings together people from diverse viewpoints, and that I'm also the author of several books, which I was delighted to hear, because maybe it knows something about the future that I don't know, because as of right now I haven't at least finished any books. More on that in another time. But obviously it was wrong about that. Now, with church history, I've found it to be a lot better, right? If its data set only goes up to 2021, chances are it's not going to know that much about me, and let's be honest, there's not that much written about me on the internet. But there's a whole lot written about the church fathers, and a whole lot of it is open source, and it's old, and there's tons of scholarly articles available that are open source, that it has combed through and been trained on, and it does really well with them. And so I think there's lots of exciting opportunities there. I could go on about this all day. I find technology very interesting, and I do believe that one of the great tasks for Christians in this era is to figure out how to use technology faithfully, and that can open up some really interesting conversations that I hope to engage with you all with. In any case, for now, that is all. That is my take on how to use ChatGPT for church history. In the meantime, be on the lookout for more videos, and as always, go out and love God and love others, because truly above all else, that will change the world.